Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of the Forum 2000. And it's a great honor to be here with you in the city of Prague, which has a very symbolic meaning for the Russian democratic movement. On the 21st of August, 1968, the Soviet Politburo sent in troops and tanks into Czechoslovakia in order to crush the Prague Spring. And at the same time, they took great efforts to put up an appearance of universal public support among Soviet citizens for the invasion of Czechoslovakia. Across the country, workers' collectives, trade union meetings, citizens' assemblies, Communist Party and Komsomol committees met to pass unanimous resolutions in support of the brotherly help by the Warsaw Pact countries to the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic. On the 25th of August, 1968, 7 people, 7 brave Russians, went out onto Red Square to protest against the invasion. At exactly 12 o'clock in the afternoon, they sat down by the Place of Skulls, just across from the Kremlin's Spasskaya Tower on Red Square, and put up their placards: "Hands off Czechoslovakia," "Down with the occupiers," and the most famous one of all, "For your freedom and ours." That demonstration lasted about 5 minutes. All the participants were arrested, some were beaten up, they were later tried and received lengthy prison terms and sent to labor camps, prisons, and special psychiatric hospitals. This is how they paid for those 5 minutes on Red Square. That was the price of freedom and dignity under the Soviet regime. But after that, no one could say that there was unanimous support among Soviet citizens for the invasion of Czechoslovakia. A few years ago, I made a documentary film about the dissident movement in the Soviet Union, as seen through the eyes of its own participants. And it's called They Chose Freedom, as Thomas has mentioned. And one of the people that I had the honor to interview for that movie was Natalia Gorbanevskaya, one of those 7, one of the people who came to Red Square on the 25th of August, 1968, to protest against the invasion of Czechoslovakia. And she told me something that I will never forget. She said, "For me, going out to that demonstration was a selfish act. I wanted to have a clean conscience." Those words still ring very true in Russia today. And that famous slogan from 1968, "For your freedom and ours," is also still very relevant for Russian Democrats today. 2 years ago, in September 2014, tens of thousands of people marched through central Moscow to protest against Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine. That was supposedly supported by the vast majority of Russian people, if we are to believe state television and official opinion polls. The sea of faces and flags stretched all the way down the Boulevard Ring from Pushkin Square to Andrei Sakharov Avenue. And for those of you who've been in Moscow now, that's a pretty long way. And by the time those of us in the front of the rally reached the ending point on Sakharov Avenue, people in the back were still lining up to go through metal detectors to begin going down that march. That march was led by Boris Nemtsov, who was the strongest, the bravest, the most effective, the most prominent opponent of Putin's authoritarianism, lawlessness, and corruption. A former deputy prime minister, regional governor, parliamentary leader, who was at one time a part of the very top of the official Russian establishment, Boris Nemtsov could have easily chosen the comfortable path of collaboration, silence, or exile, like so many others have done. But he loved his country too much to watch its future being destroyed by authoritarians and kleptocrats, and to just stand idly by. Just like Natalia Gorbanevskaya, he too wanted to have a clean conscience. So he chose to stay and fight. And he gave everything to that fight. And in the end, he gave it his life. As you all well know, in February of last year, Boris Nemtsov was gunned down, murdered by 5 bullets in the back, as he was walking to his home over the Bolshoi Moskoretsky Bridge, just 200 meters from the Kremlin Wall, in what is probably the most security-ridden and well-guarded district, not just in Moscow, but in the whole of Europe. That is the price for freedom and dignity in today's Russia under Vladimir Putin. Boris Nemtsov always taught me to live by the motto, do what you must and come what may, just like he lived his own life. And so we continue today, as best we can, without him, to keep alive the principles of freedom, democracy, rule of law, and human rights in Russia. However hopeless it may seem today, and however high the obstacles that the authorities put in front of us, and there are many obstacles, from politically motivated prosecutions and lengthy prison terms that many of our friends are serving, to something even more serious, as with the severe poisoning that I was very fortunate to have survived last year. There are many people across Russia who reject the autocracy, the corruption, the international isolationism that have become the hallmarks of Vladimir Putin's regime. You don't see these people on state television. You don't hear their voices in the State Duma. Their votes are ignored in the rigged and manipulated elections that our country holds. But they are there. And I see and I meet them every week as I travel around our country, as we hold street rallies, public meetings, and political discussions to try to break through that wall of propaganda and coercion. And as we support and engage young opposition activists across the country who are willing to stand up for their beliefs, even at high personal risk. 1 month ago, Russia held a so-called parliamentary election. Like all other elections under Vladimir Putin, this one had little in common with a genuine democratic procedure. But nevertheless, our movement, Open Russia, which as Thomas mentioned was founded and is led by Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who's for more than 10 years Vladimir Putin's most prominent political prisoner, and the movement that I have the honor of representing here. We supported some 24 young candidates across the country, from St. Petersburg to Irkutsk, from the shores of the Baltic Sea to the shores of Lake Baikal. These are the new faces, the new generation of the democratic movement in Russia. And they ran in this election not to win, because that is impossible in the current circumstances. And believe me, you're very lucky in what you're able to achieve, even with all the difficulties that you have in Hungary. But we are running not to win, because that's impossible. We are running to show that an alternative exists, and to show a different vision for a free, peaceful, and democratic Russia. Because one of the founding myths of the Putin regime is that there is no alternative. That if not Putin, then whom? That's the question the Kremlin propaganda keeps asking, and that goes all the way down from the Kremlin to the local municipal council. So our candidates went in to show that an alternative exists, that it is there. And also, as another goal, to gain experience, to gain political, public experience, to take their first steps in politics and public life, because they are all very young. I feel like an old man when I travel around the country and meet them. They're 25, 27, 28. And we are happy that we were able to help them take those first steps in political life, as difficult as it is today. And we will continue to do this work. We will continue to support and engage those young democratic activists. We will continue to support the voices of independent media in the regions. We will continue to try to build and sustain this movement, because we should do what we must and come what may. But also because we know from Russian history that small streams eventually turn into rivers, and lonely dissenting voices eventually become mass demands. In August 1967, just 7 people went out onto Red Square to protest against the Politburo's decision to invade Czechoslovakia. In August 1991, hundreds of thousands of people went to the streets of Moscow to stand in front of the tanks and to stop an attempted hardline communist and KGB-led coup d'etat. So the day will come when the Russian people say no to the Putin regime, and when they stand up for the freedom and the dignity. And we have maybe a little more time, because you said your oldest son is 15, my oldest daughter is only 10, so I have more time than you. But we know that that day will come. And I think we have to do everything in our power and everything that we can to bring that day just a little bit closer. Thank you very much, and thank you once again. It's an honor to be here.